All right, let's talk about the most complex and honestly, the most fascinating filing cabinet you will ever own, your brain. We're going to pull open the drawers and really see how this incredible personal filing system actually works. You know the feeling. We've all been there. You walk into the kitchen with a mission, you get there, and poof, it's gone. You're just standing there, completely blank. Well, that frustrating little moment, it's the perfect window into the intricate and, yeah, sometimes kind of glitchy process of our memory. So, what is really going on in there?
At its core, memory really just boils down to a three-step process. First, you've got encoding. Think of it like creating a new file on your computer. Then comes storage, which is, you guessed it, saving that file in the right cabinet. And finally, there's retrieval, which is finding and opening that file right when you need it. If any one of those steps fails, that's when you find yourself lost in the kitchen.
So let's start with those first two steps, making the file and saving it. It turns out your brain doesn't just have one giant storage unit, it actually has two very, very different spaces for information. I want you to think of your short-term memory as a little sticky note or a notepad. It's temporary. It holds a small amount of information, usually about 7 things, for less than 30 seconds. And get this, here's a really cool detail. Short-term memory stores stuff primarily by how it sounds. That's why you might mix up letters that sound alike, like T and D. But your long-term memory, that's the massive archive. It stores a seemingly infinite amount of information, and it files things away by their meaning, not just how they sound. So how do we get something from that temporary little notepad into the permanent archive? Well, the magic word here is consolidation. This is the process where your brain decides something is important enough to keep, and it does this by linking the new information to memories and knowledge you already have stored away. It's all about connection. And that brings us to the two main ways we try to make things stick. On one hand, you've got maintenance rehearsal. This is just repeating something over and over again. 555 1234, 555 1234. It keeps the number on your mental notepad, but as soon as you stop, it's gone. On the other hand, you have elaborative rehearsal, and this is the real key to long-term storage. You have to relate the information to something meaningful. You think, oh, this number is just one digit off from my own. That connection, that's what tells your brain, hey, file this one away in the archive. This is important. Okay, so now that we know the basic mechanics of how this all works, how can we actively upgrade our own mental software? Let's get into some real practical strategies. First up, let's talk about the spacing effect. I mean, this chart really says it all, doesn't it? If you cram for a test the night before, your retention is not great. But if you spread that exact same amount of study time out over several days, that's space study, your retention skyrockets. And why is that? Because you're giving your brain the time it needs to do that crucial consolidation process we were just talking about. And a huge part of that consolidation process happens when you're not even awake. Seriously. Sleep is not passive time. Your brain is actively working, replaying the day's events, strengthening the important neural connections, and filing those memories away. REM sleep, in particular, is like the brain's graveyard shift for memory filing. So if you skimp on sleep, you're pretty much telling your mental archivist to just take the night off. Not a great idea. Now let's talk about some active hacks, mnemonic devices. These are just clever little shortcuts that can help you remember almost anything. They work by taking boring, abstract information and giving it some kind of structure or meaning that your brain can actually latch onto. Probably the most common one is the acronym. Trying to remember the 5 Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior, that's kind of tough. But remembering the simple word homes, that's easy. Your brain just has to store one meaningful word instead of 5 totally random ones. It's just more efficient. Now, a more advanced technique is called the method of loci, or you might have heard of it as a memory palace. You take a place you know inside and out, like your own house, and you mentally place the items you want to remember in different locations. So for your grocery list, you might picture a giant carton of milk blocking your front door, and then eggs splattered all over the living room couch, and maybe a loaf of bread just baking in the bathtub. I know, it sounds ridiculous, but creating these vivid, weird images makes them incredibly hard to forget. But, ultimately, not every trick is going to work for everyone. And this is where something called meta-memory comes in. It's basically your awareness of your own memory's strengths and weaknesses. Do you need to set alarms? Do lists work for you? Honestly, understanding how you remember, that's the ultimate memory hack. Okay, so we've encoded and stored the memory. Great. But what about getting it back out again? This is the retrieval stage, and it's where that incredibly frustrating tip of the tongue feeling happens. So, finding a memory isn't just a random search. It's all about cues. Retrieval cue, like the smell of cookies instantly reminding you of your grandma's house. It's like a search term for your brain. That same principle, which we call encoding specificity, is also why it's easier to remember something in the same room where you first learned it. And it's why it's easier to recall a happy memory when you're already in a good mood. Your state of mind is a really powerful retrieval cue.
But, of course, this system isn't perfect. Forgetting isn't always a failure. Sometimes it's actually a feature, helping us clear out clutter. But other times, yeah, it's definitely a bug. Let's look at why our filing system can sometimes fail us. One of the biggest reasons we forget is something called interference, where memories basically just get in each other's way. Retroactive interference is when new information makes it hard to remember old stuff. So once you finally learn your new phone number, your old one just gets fuzzy. Proactive interference is the opposite. Old habits get in the way of new information. You get a new parking spot at work, but for a solid week, you keep automatically driving to the old one. And here's another super common memory glitch that this explains, the serial position effect. Whenever you're given a list, we tend to remember the items at the beginning. That's the primacy effect, because we had time to rehearse them into our long-term memory. And we remember the items at the very end, the recency effect, because they're still fresh on our mental notepad. But what about those poor items in the middle? Yeah, they usually get lost in the shuffle. And all of this leads to what might be the single most important takeaway about memory. It is not a video camera. It is not a perfect, high-fidelity recording of the past. It's something way more complex and, frankly, far less reliable than we think. The truth is, your memory is reconstructive. Every single time you recall an event, you are rebuilding it from scratch. You use these things called schemas, your mental frameworks of how things are supposed to be, to fill in any missing gaps. And this is also why the misinformation effect is so powerful. If someone suggests an incorrect detail after an event happened, your brain can accidentally weave that little detail right into the memory itself, changing it forever without you even realizing it. Which leaves us with a final, pretty fascinating question. We tend to think of our memories as the building blocks of who we are, right? They're our personal story. But if those building blocks aren't solid rock and are instead more like clay, constantly being reshaped every time we touch them, what does that say about the story of us? It's definitely something to think about.